some of the great ancient texts of Buddhism and looking at what they can tell us about how we can practice and live here and now. So we started out looking at some of the earliest texts of Buddhism recorded in the Pali language, what's called the Pali Canon. We did that for 3 months. And then we explored some of the texts of the next great phase of in the development of Buddhism, the so-called Mahayana, the so-called great vehicle, the great way. And then over the last, getting signals from the crowd, does that turn it up or down? Then over the last few months, so few weeks, we've been looking at the third great phase, a third great phase in the development of Buddhism, the Vajrayana, the path of the diamond thunderbolt, sometimes called Tantric Buddhism. And we saw that, we've been looking at texts up until then, but we saw that the Vajrayana doesn't mainly communicate through words. It has a strong emphasis on trying to get beyond mere intellectual understanding and communicate at a deeper level. So instead of communicating through words and texts, it often communicates through symbols and myth. So we've been looking at the Vajrayana, we've often been looking at the Vajrayana through symbols and archetypes and myth, as well as texts as such. And I'm going to do that tonight as well. And tonight, the Vajrayana, our emphasis on the Vajrayana sort of intersects with another theme, which we'll run for the next 2 weeks. So we've called these 2 weeks Dana Fortnight. Dana means generosity fortnight. So over the next 2 weeks, we're going to explore the spiritual significance of generosity. And in keeping with our Vajrayana tantric theme, we're going to explore the tantric significance of generosity as well, to see how that fits. And we're also going to have a look at how that fits in with what we're doing here and how we practice. So you probably know by now that our Buddhist center, well, maybe you don't if you haven't been here before, but our Buddhist center runs on what we call a generosity economy. It only exists because lots and lots of people are generous in lots and lots of different ways. We don't charge for any Buddhist events. We've got a center team who work for, it's supposed to be support, but, it'd be sort of rather one-legged support, to be honest. We raise something like £50,000 a year in standing orders, which is like earmarked for support for the centre team, and we have no. I'm getting nods.
For me again, sorry.
Okay, well, just try and. I thought she's telling me I'm wrong. We raise about £50,000 in standing orders, which is earmarked with its gift aid for supporting the centre team. There are 6 members of the centre team. Do the sums. Working here is an act of generosity, okay? So 6 people work on the centre team for generosity. People give talks out of generosity. They clean the centre. They do the accounts. They do the garden. They do maintenance. They do all sorts of things. This centre runs on generosity. It's a generosity economy. Our spiritual community is held together by generosity. In all sorts of ways, that is completely central to what we're trying to do, to the vision that we have of what we want this place to be. And that's what we're going to explore over the next couple of weeks. And if exploring that means that our mutual spirit of generosity grows stronger, great. But what we're not going to do is ask you for money. So you can relax. Well, no. So our main purpose is to explore the practice of jhana, generosity, what it does for our spiritual lives, and what it can create. So as I said, tonight and next week, our theme of the Vajrayana, our theme of the Tantra, intersects with our theme of dana, generosity. We're going to look at the two together. They're going to intersect in ways that will eventually become apparent, if not immediately. So you'll have to wait to see how, because the title of tonight's talk is The Land of Oddiyana. The Land of Oddiyana. Oddiyana, sometimes called Oddiyana with a U, in Tibetan Urgen. I think it literally means garden. Literally means garden. But Oddiyana is a sort of place in the past, a mythical, magical realm, usually put somewhere in the past, often referred to as a sort of dharmic paradise, a realm of the Dharma where the practice of the Dharma was strong and intense, so that the whole land was suffused with the Dharma, and the people were transformed by the Dharma, to create a sort of dharmic paradise. And for those who have been coming to these talks so far, Padmasambhava, the great guru, the great tantric guru of Vajrayana Buddhism, this semi-mythic figure, he comes from Oddiyana. That's his home. He came from Oddiyana. The Tibetan invocation of Padmasambhava, Tibetans invoke Padmasambhava, inviting him into the present. Udagyen Nyulji Nubjam Tsam, from the realm of Oddiyana. So they're asking him, come from the realm of Oddiyana. He's still there. So Oddiyana is not in time, it's not in place. So yeah, Oddiyana is often sort of set in the past, as it were. And scholars, as scholars do, argue about the historical location of Oddiyana. Some have suggested it was a Swat Valley in northern Pakistan, northwest Pakistan. Others have suggested that it was a region of Afghanistan. And others have suggested that it was a region of what is now Persia, what is now Iran. But as usual, scholars miss the point. Because Oddiyana is not really anywhere. Oddiyana is not really a place in our material world. It's a mythic archetype. It exists in another dimension, if you like. If you like, we're in one virtual reality and it's in another higher virtual reality. It exists in another higher reality. So Oddiyana exists beyond time and place. And it manifests here, sometimes imperfectly, in different times and places. A reflection of it will manifest here. So maybe a reflection of Oddiyana did exist in all those places that scholars argue about. Maybe it did exist in the Swat Valley and in part of Afghanistan and in part of Persia. Maybe at different times it did. Oddiyana could manifest anywhere. Because what Oddiyana really is, as I say, it's a mythic realm. It's, if you like, it represents our true home. It represents the place we really belong. It is what we are seeking, whether we know it or not. It's what we long for. The sense of longing that for something that we can't put our finger on, that we might feel when we see great beauty or hear great inspiring music. That sense of longing is longing for our true home, longing for Oddiyana. And there are myths about this in many, many different spiritual traditions. In many, many spiritual traditions, our journey towards fulfillment, towards our spiritual potential, is seen as a return journey to our true home. It's as though we're exiled from our true home to a place where we don't belong. We're strangers in a strange land. And we have to remember where we really come from and make a return journey to that place. All sorts of different myths in many different spiritual traditions about that. Getting back to our real home, the place we long for, what all our longing is really directed at. And as well as all those other spiritual traditions, there are many, many parables about this in all sorts of spiritual traditions. But Oddiyana is also a version of a common myth in Buddhism, a common theme in Buddhism, as well as many other spiritual traditions. And in Buddhism, this is the myth of the Pure Land, sometimes called the Buddha land or the Buddha field. So a pure land is a world beyond this one, a world of light and beauty and nobility, where the very breezes sort of create beautiful dharmic music, and to step into the water is to just realize delight, but where beings live in complete harmony or even communion with each other. And usually a pure land is seen as the creation of an enlightened being. An enlightened being sort of creates a force field around themselves in which a pure land exists. But that all sounds a bit sort of theoretical and idealized. And we're talking about the Vajrayana here, and the Vajrayana gets away from what is theoretical and idealized. The Vajrayana always wants to get away from the sort of high-flown theoretical to the concrete, what we can do, what we can live, what's in our actual life. So how's that idea of a pure land relevant to our practice? Well, we might get a clue as to how a pure land or something like Oddiyana might exist in our actual experience from a text called the Vimalakirti Nirdesha, the teaching of Vimalakirti. And this text devotes a whole chapter to how to create a pure land here and now. Actually create a pure land here and now. So it tells us that a pure land, a Buddha field, is a field of sentient beings. It's a field of sentient beings. It's not sort of grass and soil and trees. It's a place, it's a field of sentient beings. And it says it is created by the positive thought of sentient beings. It is created by their ethics. It's created by their generosity. It's created by their effort. It's created by their meditation. It's created by their wisdom. It's created by their metta. It's created by their compassion. And it's created by their joy in one another's happiness. And it's created, it tells us that it's created by the practice of the four means of unification. The four means of unification. And I'll say a bit more about the four means of unification in a minute. But in other words, a sort of reflection of this mythic pure land, what the Vimalakirti Nirdesha is saying, what the reflection of the pure land, or the pure land, can be created here and now by sentient beings. It can be created by a community of people. A community of people coming together based on the Dharma, practicing the Dharma. So a reflection of Oddiyana, or a glimpse of Oddiyana, can be created in the material world for a while by a community based on the Dharma. In other words, by a Sangha. It can be created by a Sangha. And maybe that happened in the Swat Valley. Maybe that did happen in the Swat Valley in northwest Pakistan. Maybe it happened for a different period in part of Afghanistan. Maybe it happened for a while in part of Iran. It could happen in Sheffield. So, okay, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? Okay, so it's created by all those things. Wouldn't that be nice? Let's be more specific. How, being more specific, could we think about how we create Oddiyana here and now, how we create the Pure Land here and now? And for the answer to that, we need to go back to the Pali texts that we looked at way back months ago, the very earliest sort of texts in Buddhism. like so much in later Buddhism, the seed of what we're talking about is found in the very earlier text, but it was developed in later Buddhism. So there's a story in the Pali Canon. There's a story in the Pali Canon about a man called Hataka. And Hataka is a disciple of the Buddha. I'm not quite sure about the sort of chronology of this, but he goes off, I think he goes off and he's taught by the Buddha. He's taught by the Buddha. He becomes a disciple of the Buddha. And then he goes home. He goes home, and that's the last the Buddha sees of him for ages. So the Buddha wanders around from place to place. That's what the Buddha did. He wandered around teaching people with his Sangha. And he wanders around. And eventually, like decades later, he turns up in Hataka's town. And the Buddha is obviously a bit surprised to find that Hataka has gathered this great community of people. He's gathered this great community of people around him. Great following. Crowds of people come to meditate with him. Crowds of people come to hear him talk about the Dharma. And there's a great sense of community among them. Many of them share their wealth. They help those in need. He's created this big, very, very positive community. And the Buddha asks, Hataka, how did you gather this huge community? And Hataka said, well, just did what you told me. I did what you told me. I practiced the 4 means of unification. The 4 very means of unification that the Vimalakirti, the Desha, the holy teaching of Vimalakirti tells us create a pure land. A pure land created by people's practice of the 4 means of unification. And that is what Hataka did. So the 4 means of unification. In Sanskrit, I'm sorry, I meant to get a flip chart, I haven't got one. The Samgrahavastus. I'm sure you'll never remember that, but you can watch the video. Samgrahavastus. 4 Samgrahavastus. Guess what the first one is? Generosity, hooray! That's why it's in the top. That's the connection. It all comes together. Yes. So, generosity. And why is generosity the way we create a community, the way we create a pure land, the way we create a Sangha? Generosity is the economics of the Buddha land. It's the economics of Oddiyana. And that's why at this center we have a generosity economy. I'll come back to that. I'll come back to generosity, and I'll just tell you what the other 3 are. Okay, so generosity, that's the one we need to keep our eye on. But the other 3 means of communication. Priyavadita, kindly speech. So we speak kindly. We speak. That doesn't mean we just tell flattery and white lies. You know, kindness can sometimes mean saying the unwelcome thing. But we speak kindly. We speak so as to bring out the best in each other. Very often in our society, we focus on the negative. We focus on the things that are wrong. We focus on the ways we're not getting what we want. We focus on the ways we moan, complain, blame. And that creates a really sort of world. We create a world by our speech. And we're seeking to create a different world. We're seeking to create a pure land. And to do that, we need to speak in that way. We can create a really nasty world by our speech, or we can create a really uplifting world by our speech. There's various parts of that. One really important part of that, though, is praise, actually. Rejoicing in merit. We saw a bit of that if you were here last week. We saw how hearing people rejoice in other people's positive qualities just creates an environment. It was palpable last Tuesday, I think. It was palpable that we created something. So yeah, that's the second after generosity is priyavadita, kindly speech. The third one is artacharya. which means literally beneficial activity. So in many of the commentaries, beneficial activity is equated with the most beneficial activity is to teach people the Dharma, because people's real suffering comes from lack of the Dharma. People's real need is for the Dharma. But we shouldn't rule out the fact that it just means helping each other. We create a community by helping each other. If we all just sort of go away and ignore each other's needs, well, what sort of community is that? So we create a community partly by artacharya, by beneficial activity, by acting in ways which benefit other people, and for that matter, ourselves. And then the fourth of the means of unification, the Samgrahavastu, is samanatata. Samanatata. It's related to our word same. The first three letters are SAM. It's related to our word same. It means, I think, literally sameness. Sameness. And it gets quite a few different interpretations, actually, this sameness. One is exemplification. Exemplification. We are actually behave according to what we teach. We actually walk our talk. We actually provide, if we're creating a Dharmic community, we don't just talk about the Dharma, we act according to the Dharma. We keep the precepts, we act according to the Dharma. Samanatata. We actually do acts of loving kindness, etc. It's interesting that in some traditional commentaries on samanatata, it's given a bit of a different spin, actually. It's looked at as sharing our lives with others. Sharing our lives with others so that there's a sort of sense of commonality among us. Observing the same precepts. Eating together. Spending time together. Being part of each other's lives. Being part of each other's lives is samanatata. Not sort of going off to our little nuclear niches and just coming together every now and then, but actually being part of each other's lives. It's also, in the traditional commentaries, interpreted as being reliable, or in other words, being acting the same under different circumstances. So acting the same behind and speaking the same behind a person's back as you would speak to their face. If you wouldn't criticize them to their face, you don't criticize them behind their back. If you would defend them to their face when they're present, you would defend them when they're not there, etc., etc. So being the same under different circumstances. So that's samanatata, exemplification, sameness. Got quite a rich range of meanings. So those are the three other ones: priyavadita, kindly speech; artacharya, beneficial activity; and samanatata, exemplification or sameness. But the one I really want to focus on is the first, is generosity. So as I've said, generosity is the economics of the Pure Land. It's the economics of Oddiyana. In the realm of the Dharma, which is what we're trying to create, we don't ask, how much can I grab for myself? What's it doing for me? We ask, what can I contribute? And that's how we create a Dharmic community between us. And that is why the centre has a generosity economy. So the history of this Buddhist centre, is that a number of members of the Triratna order came together here in Sheffield to gather a community. That was our intention, that was our purpose, to gather a Dharmic community, to create a community of people who practice the Dharma, who relate to each other on the basis of the Dharma, to create a community where we bring out what's best in each other, and inspire and support each other to grow. Because without such a community, none of us is going to get anywhere. So we came together to create that sort of community. We came together to create a sort of field of sentient beings, as the Vimalakirti Sutra describes it. A mini Pure Land, a reflection of Oddiyana in the here and now. And the way we did that, the way we tried to do that, was informed by the Dharma, and the Dharma tells us the way to do it. Hey, Hataka, how did Hataka do it? That's how you do it. That's what the Dharma tells us. You do it by the practice of the four means of unification, with dana, or generosity, very much at the forefront. So that's what we did, and that's what we're still trying to do. That's why we have a dana economy at this Buddhist center. So as I've said, all Buddhist events at this center are free, provided we intend as part of our practice to provide them in a spirit of generosity, rather than sort of curmudgeonly resentment or wishing to be paid loads of money. We try that anyway. Even retreats that cost us several £1,000s to put on are completely free. Terrifying. But that generosity with which we try to run the place is matched by a terrific generosity of the Sangha, in a whole host of possible ways, by people who support the centre financially, without which we just wouldn't, well, we'd be doing it, but in a field, which would be cold. But people who support the centre financially through standing orders, by a centre team who work at the centre for a bare level of support, by the people who give their skills and time and energy to teach, to lead study, to do the gardening, to do the accounts, to do all sorts of admin tasks, to clean the centre, to help with the building and the maintenance. And together, by our combined practice of dana, generosity, we create something wonderful. Bigger than any of us, something that completely flies in the face of the dismal conventional view that people will only act from selfishness. I love it. It's subversive. What? You give something you don't ask people to pay? Surely that's blasphemous. So people give to the centre and the Sangha. People create a bit of Oddiyana in a whole host of ways. There's a whole host of ways that we can practice the dana, that we can practice generosity. And this being Buddhism, hey, there's a list. So the first one on the list, not surprisingly, is giving material things, which includes money. So if it weren't for that, we couldn't operate. And that's gone back right to the very earliest days of the Dharma. In the very earliest days of the Dharma, there was a sort of symbiosis, a mutual benefiting of what were called the renunciants, who spent their time practicing the spiritual life completely sort of single-mindedly, living under trees, begging for their food, and the householders who benefited from their wisdom, benefited from their practice, and in return fed them, provided accommodation during the rainy season, and so on. A complete symbiosis between the householders and the renunciants, with the householders providing the material things, and the renunciants providing other things. So that goes right back to the very earliest days, this idea that you can be part of the project if you live a sort of a conventional worldly life in many ways. You can still practice the Dharma, and you can still be really part of the project by helping in material ways. So material things, including money, without which this centre couldn't run. Time and energy is another one. The second one is time and energy. This centre runs enormously on time and energy given complete as an act of generosity. Just about everything that happens, almost, happens in that way, except where there's really special expertise that we haven't got. Just in a whole host of ways that I've sort of already mentioned, really. Knowledge and expertise. I mean, there's a range of knowledge and expertise in the Sangha, and people give it really willingly, and it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference. We don't have to go to a firm of accountants to get our accounts done. We've got our accountant. He's on our council, and he does our accounts for nothing. He even does other people's accounts for nothing, and does all sorts of things. Incredible acts of generosity, but in all sorts of ways. People do our sound for us, for example. take videos. So people giving knowledge and expertise in all sorts of ways. Material things, time and energy, knowledge and expertise, fearlessness. Giving the gift of fearlessness is the fourth of the traditional list. That's a bit weird, isn't it? But I think what that's getting at is that just being in a positive state around other people, working with other people, in environments with other people, is a gift. It's a gift. Just in the same way that always being in a negative state is a sort of taking from other people, it drags them down. Our positivity communicates. Our positivity communicates to others, and it's a gift to them. It helps them. It uplifts, and the more of us can do that, the greater the positivity of the atmosphere we create among ourselves. So we can give positive qualities like fearlessness by being fearless ourselves. We can give metta by being mettaful, etc. We can give joy by being joyful, and so on. The last, I'm going to skip back to the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th. The last is the gift of the Dharma. The traditional list says that the gift of the Dharma is the biggest gift. I won't say too much about that because I'm sort of doing it at the moment. But one of them that's probably a bit surprising is the giving of life and limb. I mean, that might sound a bit extreme. Mind you, we have just had Remembrance Sunday, haven't we? I mean, some people are put in positions where they give life and limb. I hope we actually don't have to do that ever. But returning to our tantric theme, I think we can see that as symbolizing that, in a way, the highest form of generosity is giving ourselves. Giving ourselves. We give ourselves to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha. We give ourselves to the project of building Sangha. We give ourselves to helping the universe to develop, if you like. And there's a tantric practice in which the giving of ourselves is acted out in this really concrete way. Exactly as the giving of life and limb. And somebody can correct my Tibetan pronunciation, but I think it's called the Cho practice. It's spelled Chod, the Cho practice. So in the Cho practice, we imagine ourselves with a chopper, cutting off bits of ourselves and offering them to the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, to all beings. I don't recommend we do this. No. I do not recommend we do this. I mean, the Tantra doesn't mess around, It doesn't mess around. It wants to push the deepest buttons it can find. It wants to get right in there at sort of quite a primeval level and stir things around. And that's what it does. So we don't just think, I give myself to the Buddhas. We think, I'm cutting off my head. Here, have it. Life and limb, if you like. So I reckon what that symbolizes in a very sort of tantric way is we give ourselves. That's the highest thing we give. The Bodhisattva, the practitioner of the Bodhisattva path, they give themselves to all beings. We say this in the puja that we do, don't we? I give myself to the Buddhas, I give myself to all beings. And that is the highest form of giving. So generosity can take loads and loads of forms. We've seen that. We can all practice it because whatever, we've all got money or time or energy or expertise or something. We've all got something to give. And it's putting all that together that creates Sangha, creates the Pure Land. And we all need to practice it to get anywhere with the spiritual life. So you might have been thinking, well, the Daniel would have been encouraging us to be generous, wouldn't he? He's interested in the well-being of the Buddhist center and so on. Of course he wants us to be generous, and he thinks that some sort of side product of this, maybe we'll all rush out and sign standing orders, which will be a really nice thing. You might be thinking that, well, it's about that. But what I want is insight. What I want is to get enlightened. I want insight. I want to be enlightened. And that's what Buddhism is really about. And that's got nothing to do with generosity. You might be thinking that. Sorry to disappoint you. According to the Buddha, according to Sangha, according to loads and loads of other great masters of the tradition, generosity is the very first step on the path without which we get nowhere. Until we cultivate generosity, we get nowhere. For example, there's a sutta in the Pali Canon, these early texts, called the Maccakkarya Sutta, the Discourse on Stinginess. It's a lovely word, isn't it? The Discourse on Stinginess. And of course it's Buddhist, so it's got a list. It lists the 5 forms of stinginess. Yes. And it tells us that unless we overcome the 5 forms of stinginess, we will get nowhere with meditation. We will not get into the dhyanas, into the meditative states, unless we get over the 5 forms of stinginess. Unless we get over the 5 forms of stinginess, we will get nowhere with insight. We cannot get anywhere with insight, it says. Unless we get over the 5 forms of stinginess, we cannot possibly become enlightened. But if we do abandon the 5 forms of stinginess, we can enter the meditative states, we can gain insight, we can gain enlightenment. So overcoming our stinginess, which is a sort of Pali Canon way of saying becoming more generous. The Pali Canon always sort of does the negative somehow. Unless we do that, we're sunk spiritually. So why would generosity? Why is generosity so important? Well, I mean, okay, it's the way of eroding our egotism. I mean, it sort of really gets at both our attachment to material things, for example, and at our egotism. But I think more importantly than that, maybe even, well, it's related to that, is that it's directly connected to insight. There is a direct connection between generosity and insight. Insight into non-self, insight into the fact that we do not have a fixed and independent nature. The first stage in realizing an Atman, in realizing that our lack of a fixed and independent self-nature, is to see how completely dependent we are on others. We are totally dependent on others and the world around us. Seeing how we owe others for every benefit we received, how all the things we think of that are wonderful about me actually are the product of other people. Without others, frankly, we'd be dead for a start. And without others, we would get nowhere with the spiritual life. And we get an inkling of that from doing the exercise that we do on the intermediate course, where we sit down and we start writing all the people who have benefited us. And it goes on and on and on and on and on and on. And if we really thought about it, we'd see that, imagine tomorrow nobody's going to do anything for us. So we're going to have to start growing our own food pretty damn quick. We're going to have to start digging wells because there's no water in the tank, in the taps, etc., etc. I mean, just at a very practical level. We completely rely on others. But we also completely rely on others for any spiritual development we may have achieved. I mean, if we hadn't been taught to read and write, if we hadn't come across the Dharma, etc., etc., completely dependent on others. And seeing this complete dependency is the beginning of any sort of insight into non-self. Seeing that we do not exist as separate, standalone beings. We exist in a way which is totally interrelated, totally connected, and a network with others. So seeing that is an important step in the spiritual life. And seeing that is characterized, seeing that total dependency, seeing how much is done for us by others, It's a step in the spiritual life which is characterized by gratitude, and it's characterized by generosity. So there's a complete link between generosity and insight into non-self, insight into how the relative nature of our self, how we only exist in relation. I'd like also to say a word for gratitude here. That stage is characterized by gratitude. It's another one of those things that just creates a really positive environment, as you might have, creates a positive world around us when we feel gratitude, as you might have experienced on the intermediate course. If you want to be really miserable, focus on all the things that people do that get you down. Focus on the way you can blame others. That'll make you really miserable. If you want to be happy, focus on the things that give rise to gratitude. It's a complete change. It's a complete game changer in terms of how we live our lives. So yeah, any sort of sense of insight, the beginnings of insight, is completely tied up with a sense of gratitude and a desire to give back, a desire to practice dana. So we practice generosity for others' sake, yes, for sake of creating something bigger than ourselves, but we also practice it for ourselves. We practice it because it's the route to spiritual development, it's the route to happiness. So, to round off, my invitation to you would be, let's create a reflection of Oddiyana in Sheffield. I think we've already got a little bit of it. A glimpse, a whiff, but make this glimpse a bit more real. And the way we will do this is by sharing our dana, by sharing a mutual approach of dana, coming together as a community where our combined generosity creates something that is greater than the sum of the parts. This could be symbolized by the figure of Avalokiteshvara, the 1,000-armed Avalokiteshvara, holding this jewel to his heart, but 1,000 arms all expressing different individuals responding to that jewel. So we can come together to create something much bigger than ourselves. That is the way we will create the sort of environment that I think we actually all long for. The sort of community we all long for, a bit of Oddiyana here in the material world. And it is also the way that we ourselves will make spiritual progress, how we'll go beyond the limited self. It's something we need to do to make real spiritual progress ourselves, because we all depend on each other. Seeing that's an essential part of any real insight and wisdom, and because we all depend on each other, without that sort of environment, none of us is going to get anywhere. None of us is going to get anywhere because we are not autonomous, independent individuals. We totally depend on our context. So that's my invitation, that we come together by our mutual practice of generosity to create something bigger and important than any of us, and in the process, we'll do the very best thing we can do for ourselves.